Hey guys, here we go into a film study on Jeff Horn versus Terence Crawford. And there really aren't that many fighters that resemble Crawford that Jeff Horn has fought. You know, like we could do maybe half the side of him fighting Pacquiao, half the side of him fighting like this guy. We're going to go over Gary Corcoran. And for that reason, we're just going to kind of discuss the ways that Jeff Horn controls the space between him and his opponent, his feinting, his probing, how active his guard is, right? And all that stuff serves to control the space between you and your opponent. We're going to talk about his offense, how he sets his offense up, what type of offense he has, and then we're going to talk about his defense as well. But one thing that I wanted to talk about first was in regards to his active guard, is when he fought Manny Pacquiao. And Manny Pacquiao usually has a very high output, especially high against aggressive fighters. And Jeff Horn was the aggressor for most of that fight, right? But Manny Pacquiao actually wound up having less punches overall. So real quick, we're going to get into some data from Manny Pacquiao's fight before the Mayweather fight. Actually, this is data that was found online. It says that Pacquiao averaged 65.5 punches thrown per round in his last 12 fights, right? That's pretty active, right? That's like 800 something punches per fight or something. I don't know exactly know how many it is, you know, but it's a lot, right? Maybe like 740, 750. And that's his average. That's Pacquiao's average. But against Horn, who was also a very aggressive fighter, against Horn, he only threw 573, right? Which is an average of 47.5 punches per round, right? As opposed to 65 punches per round, so 20 punches per round less. And it wound up being only 72% of his opponent's average, or 72% of his average, right? So Jeff Horn was kind of able to mitigate, 28% of Manny Pacquiao's offense simply by having an active guard. That's going to be the first thing that we look at when we talk about this. Is I want you guys to be mindful of that as we go through the film study. But we're going to talk about it, and I'm going to try to do an amended version of this. So that I'm going to do like a very linear film study. I'm going to talk about it. I'm not going to talk about the ideas of boxing, but I'm actually going to do those in separate videos. And I'm going to point out some of the things that I'm going to talk about. And then in the separate videos, I'm going to talk specifically about those kinds of control, that kind of stuff. And I'm going to try a new format like that and see how it goes. But anyway, let's get into the fight. So right away, what do we see? Jeff Horn comes out and he starts using his lead hand, right? Probing, right? Gives him a lead hand look, right? And look at how active his guard is, right? Boom, boom, right? He leans in, feints back, leans in, gives him some head movement and rolls, and then shoots a punch, right? And the reason he shoots that punch is look at how all that stuff is making Gary Corcoran react, right? So watch Jeff Horn real quick, right? And now watch Gary, right? And this is how Gary reacts to those same feints, right? And you can see that it's having an effect on Gary Corcoran. Obviously, it's only 8 seconds into the fight, but Gary Corcoran is trying to figure out what it is that Jeff Horn is doing as well. Now, the first thing I want to point out real quick before we move on is watch this lead hand right here from Jeff Horn, right? When he shoots that out, right, that probing shot, Gary dips to the left, right, to the inside of Jeff Horn's offense, right, to the inside of Jeff Horn. And that's going to be important in just a few seconds. But again, active guard, and Jeff Horn is very active, right, feinting, coming in a lot, right, probing, right, giving him different looks, right, moving, active, high guard, controlling Gary. Now, right here, he does the same feint that he used before, right, and Gary slips to the inside of Jeff Horn's offense and then walks right into that right hand, right? And only 17 seconds into the fight, and Jeff Horn is already landing a right hand, right? And it's a right hand that he used his intelligence, right, to set up, right? And God, I'm doing it again, right? That he uses his intelligence to set up. and something that he picked up that his opponent was doing, and he was able to set a trap. But this is actually the most basic style of trap, and we'll talk about a little bit more of that later in the subsequent videos when I talk about it. Now, there we have Jeff Horn feinting, right, and kind of using a hook instead, right? But one thing I want to point out is look at where he is and how he hops in off of his offense, right, and how he closes the distance. Obviously, this was popularized by Roy Jones and perfected by Floyd Mayweather, but it's a very interesting style offense. And when we talk about the offense of Crawford, or the defense of Crawford, or the way that the fight plan works out, this is very similar to how Julius Ndongo approached the fight with the stepping in on the inside to set up his punch, right? Now, this next clip right here, right, we have Jeff Horn using the exact same technique, right? He feints in, uses the lead hand, right, and hopes that Gary Corcoran is going to slip to the inside, and he can crack him with a huge right hand, right? But it misses because this is a trap-based style of offense. Gary Corcoran is able to make an adjustment and be like, hey, man, I don't want to get hit by that again. Can you not? And he moves on. Now, also, another thing that Mayweather has popularized, right, is the jab, right? Shooting in with the jab. Well, that wasn't a great example, but right here, shooting the jab. And then here, we have him, instead of using the jab, right, he's able to hook it around the guard and land a left hook to the chin, rather than, and it's not really set up, right? It's basically trap-style offense. Once you get your opponent catching the jab or going into their high guard, you just simply go around, and you utilize the fact that your opponent thinks it's going to be a jab to land the hook. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later as well. But so far, nothing like super advanced from Jeff Horn. An active guard, Gary Corcoran has thrown like 2 punches. Real quick, actually, I do want to talk about this. Gary Corcoran, how after that hook comes in, Gary Corcoran throws one of his first few punches in the fight, over 30 seconds into the round. But because of the fact that it's not set up, right, Jeff Horn easily is able to see it, right? And that's the goal with boxing, with controlling the space between you and your opponent. Because of the fact that he's so active and doing all that stuff and moving his head and shooting his jab on some timings, right? Gary Corcoran doesn't have a lot of opportunity to set up his punches, but he knows he needs to throw punches to score, so he winds up pigeonholing him to these very rudimentary style offenses that he's not able to set up, and it's very easy for Jeff Horn to get out of it and not allow his opponent to be effective. Now, Jeff Horn going back to the jab, but look at how he steps with the jab as well. Again, that's going to be very important later in the future film studies when we talk more about Crawford and his ability to set up his offense. Now he comes in with the probing jab, and he tries to use a block removal technique on Gary Corcoran. But what happens, Gary Corcoran thinks it's going to be that same offense where he flashes the lead hand and then shoots the right hand. So Gary Corcoran moves away, right? Jeff Horn uses that opportunity to kind of set up a right hand, right? But look at how easy it is to tell that he's going to punch, right? He takes a step forward and he throws the right hand, but it doesn't land, right? Because he's not setting the shot up. Even his follow-up shot doesn't land. And Gary Corcoran is able to take a step back, control him, and then start coming with his own punches. Now, it doesn't matter that those punches don't land, because a better fighter may be able to use the same tactic, understanding how Jeff Horn sets up his offense and then finding ways to counter it. And it's very similar to how Julius Ndongo fought Jeff Horn. Now, there are some deviations to that, because after we saw what we saw right there, now we see Jeff Horn shoot that right hand, and this is beautiful, you guys. He shoots the right hand, right? And does he pull his weight back, right, and get back into boxing stance? No. He uses his forearm to body up against his opponent and control his arm, right? And then push off of him and then try to land a left hook, right? Very, pretty high-level stuff, to be honest. And it really works in favor of Jeff Horn because he's so freaking big. And we'll be talking about that when we talk about the breakdown of this fight too, and how being a huge guy like Jeff Horn is going to play a big part in the fight with with Crawford. Now, this is the other part of it, right? Right after Gary Corcoran showed that he was going to try to start countering, right, by taking a step back, now we have Jeff Horn using control after he throws his punches, not just moving off the line or anything, but he used that other technique where he threw the right hand, didn't wait for counters, and pressed up against him, smothered him with his forearm. Now he shoots the jab here, and he misses, and he ducks down, and then he controls his opponent's head and pulls him down to the ground. Now, if I'm Jeff Horn, or if I'm Gary Corcoran, I'm like, man, this motherfucker's cheating. He's cheating, straight up. But if I am Jeff Horn's corner, I'm saying, attaboy, Jeff Horn. Don't let him throw you any counter punches at you. It's going to look like an accident. You have plausible deniability. This is a fast-paced and rugged sport. Figure it out, Gary. Now moving on, we have Jeff Horn again. Great feinting, right? Feinting low, getting his opponent to move out of position, picking up on information, but then kind of exploding out of his guard and shooting that jab. But Gary Corcoran, again, is not looking to stay there. He knows that Jeff Horn is a little crafty. He's gotten caught with a couple right hands, that left hook around the guard. But now Jeff Horn isn't really setting his offense up right here. Whoops. Like right here, and he's continuing to step with his jab. And one of the reasons that he's getting away with using his jab so actively here is because Gary Corcoran is not able to counter. Great offense right here. He knows that when he knows that when he shoots the jab, Gary Corcoran's going to go into his high guard. So he shoots the jab here, and he doesn't commit to it, gets Gary Corcoran to go into the high guard, and then lands a great right hand to the body. And then what does he do immediately? So he doesn't get countered. He starts wrestling with him, trying to control his hands. Again, a great offense right there, throwing the hook and then opening up the shot to the body. Great shot. But again, it's very basic style of offense. In that regard, he had to commit to the hook. And again, I'll extrapolate on these ideas in subsequent videos. I just want to do 2 rounds of this film study, kind of briefly and kind of quickly, because I know that not everyone is interested in those extrapolations. Some decent feinting right there from Mr. Horn, and landing a jab. But he's taken away Gary Corcoran's desire to counterpunch simply by kind of wrestling him, right? And because of that, he kind of has free reign, because he also has such great control over his opponent and the space in between them. So Gary Corcoran, notice, Gary Corcoran's not feinting. Gary Corcoran's not using his lead hand to control Jeff Horn. And that's why Jeff Horn is able to walk this way and throw that right hand and not really have to worry about any counters. Notice how after he shoots that, boom, he folds up on him. And now all of a sudden, Gary cannot use any right hands to counter or to supplement his offense and be active in the fight, because of the way that Jeff Horn is defending himself when he puts himself out of position. It's actually a great adjustment from Jeff Horn. And again, very basic offense here, flashing the lead hand, right, the left hook, and then committing to it so that he can land the right hand to the body. And again, not setting up that right hand, just kind of trying to find a timing and be active. And now all of a sudden, when he doesn't control Gary, Gary takes a step back because he can see when Jeff Horn is going to throw punches, because Jeff Horn has that very basic timing, right? And he kind of telegraphs it as well. If you look at his hands, he kind of brings his left hand up a little bit. It's like one of his little tells for that right hand. I'm sure that there's more to it, but I'm not picking it up. But every time I see him do it in the fight, I'm like, oh, right hand, it's coming. It's very obvious. It's very blatant. Okay, so look at his feet, right? How he sets down. I think that might be what it is. But he takes a step back with his right leg, and he kind of sets up, and it's really obvious that he's going to shoot that right hand. I think that's the exact one, but there's more tells to it. Like, obviously, the hand position is the last tell that you would need, and the feet one would be the first one. That's the one that you want to pick up, is his foot position and him setting down to set up a punch. And that's indicative of him throwing a right hand, and what's indicative of him throwing a jab um, is when he takes a step forward. As you can see, he feints here. He feints, and then he does another feint, and he still steps forward with his jab. So you can tell when he's going to throw some shots. And look at how he doesn't even really feint him with the right hand, right? It's a little bit of a feint, but his opponent knows that it's not going to be a right hand because he doesn't plant himself. He uses it simply to transition forward, right? Gets his glove up a little bit, but beautiful control with the left hand first as he shifts forward and starts throwing punches. Actually, that's a really beautiful technique from Jeff Horn. And I think that if he was doing it, like I still feel like it's a very basic line of offense, in spite of the fact that it's a very high level tactic. If that makes sense, because the way that he's setting up is very basic. He doesn't know how his opponent is going to react to it. I think in this instance, he thinks that his opponent's going to take a step back, but that doesn't serve him to feint here and then feint here, because then his opponent, if he takes a step back, like he did with the last right hand, he's going to be too far away to land a right hand or land that combination anyway. But also, it's going to serve to put him into a position where he's getting caught. Now, again, after this combination, what does Jeff Horn do? He controls his opponent and starts pushing him around and bullying him. This is going to be very important for the fight with Terence Crawford. Very, very important, especially once we start analyzing tape of his fight with Julius Indongo. And I'm going to let the round kind of play out. I might pause it in a few spots, like right here. Watch him shoot his jab and take that step forward. Not the greatest offense right there. Not bad right here, though. So boom, boom. And then he's noticed that when he throws those punches before, that Gary Corcoran hasn't been countering. So he winds up throwing a third shot, adding on to it, because he feels like it's safe, and winds up landing a good left hook right there. But again, not the highest level setups of these shots, but very, very, very active for the early rounds. And I want to talk about that difference between this style. Like, notice how much different this fight is than Naoya Inoue, right? I know I got a lot of hate for that video, like not calling him the monster, like saying his offense is basic. But look at how much more active Jeff Horn has been during the course of this round, picking up on patterns that his opponent has, feinting, using head movement, right? All stuff that Inoue does not use, and how successful he's been. Now, again, I don't know who's countering who, to be honest. It looks like they kind of go out at the same time, but he lands a great jab. I think that maybe he has a good cross block too, but I don't want to focus on that because it's kind of like an anomaly. But here we have Jeff Horn again. You can see him set down right before he throws that right hand, and he's able to get his guard up, and it doesn't look like it lands. It looks like it actually, maybe it kind of does. Nah, it looks like maybe it hits him, like it's like a glancing blow, half on the inside, half on the outside of the glove. But there are going to be a lot of other important things for this fight. Number one is going to be, look at the size of Gary Corcoran. They're supposed to be the same height if you look on BoxRec, but Jeff Horn is way freaking bigger than this guy. Now, this is a fancy little shot right here, right? He gives him the head movement, dips this way, dips that way, shoots the right hand, and then pivots and moves off the line. He doesn't use that technique a lot, but it is something very interesting that Jeff Horn might seem like he's doing. Now, Jeff Horn feinting with the jab, right? Feint. What does his opponent do? Feint him again, and then he slips to the inside. I don't know if that's something that Gary Corcoran has a bad habit of doing, because you don't usually want to slip to the inside of your opponent's jab. You want to slip to the outside, unless you're throwing a right hand with it to counter over the top of that jab, which is an interesting wrinkle. Why isn't he doing that? I don't know. But Jeff Horn is able to easily set that jab up with a more probing style right there. So we're going to look for that as well. Now Gary Corcoran again with the slip to the inside on that probing jab. But unfortunately, Jeff Horn, again, taking those steps with his jab every time, right? And now, even when he feints here, he still steps with the jab, and Gary is able to easily pick up on the fact that the offense is coming and move his head. Again, Jeff Horn, with the style of offense that he has, you can just see him setting up, and it's very easy to time him, I feel like. Notice he doesn't land either of those punches because he telegraphs them. Actually, no, he doesn't land that hook. No way. But it's very easy to time him because of the way his style is in and out kind of style. Now we're going to do round two really quickly, and this round gets really interesting. Man, I think I talked too much about it, and I'm ruining the content from the other videos I was going to make. I'm not sure, but this round is going to be much different for Jeff Horn. As you can see, Gary Corcoran is coming out much faster. He's being much more active, and he's timing Jeff Horn, right? Watch this scene, right? Jeff Horn is coming in, and he's about to get set up. He's kind of doing not a bouncing, right, per se, but because he hops in, right, Gary is able to start setting up his own offense and keep Jeff Horn off balance because Jeff Horn telegraphs when he's going to be setting up for punches. Now, again, this instance right here, he only lands that last punch because it's a little bit off rhythm. Gary was probably not expecting it, but all those other punches that he's committing to, this right hand, the block removal technique, which is really cool, but he misses the right hand anyway, because he's giving up his timing. Now, his offense was also trap-based, and that's important because now those traps are not working. Notice that Gary is not walking into the right hand anymore. He's not walking into that left hook. None of it's working because he's already told Gary about those traps. Jeff has already told him about it, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But all of a sudden, Jeff Horn is being countered again because he's not controlling the space. He's not feinting as much, even though the fact that he still winds up looking like he wins this exchange with that right hook right there, or that like overhand right on the inside. Jeff Horn, his offense, because it's kind of lackluster, it's kind of basic, is allowing Gary to pick up on those patterns, again, setting up and getting set with his right hand, making it very easy to time. Even though Gary hasn't figured out how to land punches off of it, he's still figuring out that when it's safe to plant himself, when it's safe to throw offense, and when Jeff Horn is throwing punches. So let's see. Comes in with the jab, he gets under it, and then Jeff Horn eats a body shot. Not a big deal. Boom. Unless you don't like getting hit to the body. But all of a sudden, Jeff Horn, for some reason, has kind of abandoned that like aggressive, controlling technique, that smothering technique that he was using in the first round. And I didn't ever find a good reason for it, to be honest. But all of a sudden, because of the fact that that timing was so easy for Gary to figure out, all of a sudden he's able to be pressing Jeff Horn. And that's a very important theme for the fight with Crawford. Even though Jeff Horn is doing really well, I still think he's winning the round easily. Does a decent job right there, shooting the jab, moving off the line. He looks a little awkward doing it, but even if you look awkward and you're not getting hit with punches, you're doing something right. And again, Gary Corcoran not having great offense, right? Look at how he just throws that 1-2, and that's because he doesn't have a lot of opportunities to throw punches at Jeff, because Jeff has that head movement, the feinting and stuff. So he has to take whatever opportunities he can, and when he thinks they're going to present themselves. Now again, very basic offense from Jeff Horn. Flashing the lead hand right here when he's out of position, and Gary's like, uh-oh, he flashed the lead hand, what's he going to do? And is able to get under that right hand. Now, that's not how you want to get away from a right hand, because you don't want to walk into an uppercut. Maybe Jeff Horn can turn it into an uppercut later, but it's the idea that he's picking up on that timing and that feinting and that basic style of offense, and that means that it's going to be very easy for Crawford to do as well. Now, this is interesting too, because here he shoots the probing jab and then controls his head like he's supposed to, but he doesn't move off the line quickly enough, and he doesn't control him well enough. His hand is kind of on his neck, and you want it more on the collarbone, and you want to put your weight into it too. And it doesn't look like Jeff Horn has his weight into it, because look at how he's hopping, right? And now all his weight winds up, is it on his left leg but he's not leaning into his opponent, so he doesn't actually have any control over his opponent. And his opponent's easily able to land that left hook and start wrestling with him. So he'll have to shore that up a little bit for sure. But look at how all of a sudden how physical Jeff Horn's getting. I love this technique right here. So he shoots his kind of probing jab right here. Well, let's look at that one first. Boom, controlling his head, right? And then measuring, you know, boom. And it's not like a real measure. I know a lot of people think measuring, stick your lead hand out, boom, boom, right? But it's the same exact principle that when you're in that high-paced, fast-paced motion, you're just like, okay, there it is, boom. And you feel it. It's a feeling that you have that you know that right hand is there. He's able to control him there and then try to do the same thing right there. But having a very difficult time with Gary because, again, he's very easy to time, right? It's very easy to tell when he's going to throw punches. And Jeff Horn, when he's, you know, kind of fighting Gary, he's still winning, but the initial engagements, he's not having nearly as much success in the first as he did in the first round because his offense is so basic. Again, very easy to time. You can see him setting up for it. You can't really see his feet right there, but you know what I mean. Who lands a shot there? So rolling, opening up with that shot, and eating a combination. Yeah. But Gary, you know, doing a very good job of reading Horn, even though Horn is just, you know, leaps and bounds a better fighter. You know, he passes the eye test much better than Gary does. And that means that when they have, let's go back to that. When they have situations like this, where they're fighting on the inside, on average, Jeff Horn's going to do better because he has better technique and he's faster than Gary. And that's why the eye test kind of stuff is so important. Now Jeff Horn, you know, getting a little frustrated, shooting the jab, and then controlling Gary, holding his head down. I don't really like that, holding his head down like that and shooting an uppercut right there. But it's interesting because Gary is so much bigger than he is, you know, and Jeff Horn is still able to have a very physical fight with this guy. Oh, I love that. Good job, Gary. So Gary's like, oh yeah, I too can play that game. Boom, and catch him with an uppercut. But very interesting stuff all of a sudden in the second round, right? This round is a lot less clean, a lot more dirty, and Jeff Horn's not winning all of the engagements all of a sudden. And that's because his offense is so easy to figure out and easy to adjust from because you know when he's going to be punching. So now that he's no longer... Well, we'll talk about that later. But as you can see, Gary's having a lot of success on the inside in fighting with Jeff Horn because Jeff Horn's very predictable. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in my next video when I talk about Jeff Horn's offense and his defense and the flaws in it. This wasn't supposed to be a 30-minute video. It was actually supposed to be like 15, so it's a little longer than I wanted. But a lot of very interesting stuff in here. And obviously, like, this film study is not nearly as in-depth as my normal ones, but that's why we're going to have the follow-up video tomorrow. Anyway, let me know what you guys think in the comments below about Jeff Horn's tactics, about his defense, about his offense, and his in-and-out style, you know. How do you guys think it's going to line up against Crawford?